Looking for tips and tricks on a new city? Top Dog Tours is the best place to check out walking tours. We are in Boston, Philadelphia, Toronto, and New York City. Visit us on topdogtours.com to book your tour today and check us out on social media for offers, discounts, and pictures. Hello, I'm Nicole Kelly, and this is She Brew in the City. And tonight I am having a conversation with Rabbi-Cantor Judy Greenfeld, which I'm excited because I've never talked to you at all. So I'm excited to learn so much about you and your story. How are you tonight?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Like I said, I've had a busy day, but I feel like I still have a lot of energy. So that's great for an interview.
That's for sure.
So I always start off by asking about my guest's background, where they're from, how they were raised, how religious, kind of all the regular, stuff. So spiel me with that.
Okay. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Yay, Cleveland. And I lived there for 18 years, went to college and went to school in Arizona, and then met my husband there, my ex-husband there, and moved to Los Angeles, where I lived for 40 years. So, and now I'm in Texas for 8 months.
Oh my goodness. What part of LA?
And first Encino, a lot of different places, Studio City, Encino, and now Westwood. Yeah.
I'm originally from Northridge. So my parents live like 5 minutes from CSUN.
Okay. So you know where Heschel is. Yes.
Oh yeah. That's right near, I went to TRZ. So Jewish geography was all like, there's like 5 of us.
That's really funny. Anyway, I grew up very conservative. I grew up in a conservative household, Shabbat on Friday nights, went to Hebrew school after school from age first grade to, sixth grade, and then went to Hebrew high school after school 3 days a week. And so I could read Hebrew, and that's really what they focused on back then. And we were taught mostly by Israelis and old ladies, I would say.
I had an old Israeli lady, although looking back, she might not have been that old.
Right.
She might have been in her early 50s, but she seemed ancient at the time.
And I didn't find a lot of spirituality in conservative Judaism. In fact, I found that it was rather on the hypocritical side. I felt that there was a lot of dogma, patriarchy that I wasn't thrilled with. So I was a little turned off to it, especially when I was 16, my father was murdered. And at that point, I, went out of respect to him. He was an avid Zionist. He was on he was the vice president of the National Conference of Zionists. But there was always such a pride to be Jewish. I absolutely knew who I was as a Jew, but I never went I went to Hebrew school. I didn't really go to services on Shabbat. And especially after you're 13, you don't really go. So my Judaism was really, when I went to summer camp, my Judaism was connected to the people I knew from my Hebrew school. And at age 16, when something like that happens, it causes you to question everything. And for me, because it didn't say anything comforting for me at that time, I'm the youngest of 5, I had no idea in my mind, why would God let something happen to a nice Jewish man and a nice family that lived in the suburbs and celebrated Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Passover and all of those things. What could I have done? What was happening? So in many ways, I think I was angry at God and at Judaism for many years. And so what I did was, I was still a spiritual person, and I was seeking, and I looked everywhere, and I listened to my Christian friends, and I went to Buddhism, and I went to listen to people who were more of the New Age group. I mean, this is going to age me, but Ram Dass and Stephen Halpern and I felt like psychology was an answer as well, to dealing with trauma and all of those things. And they all helped me. But there came a day when I was, and I had a Jewish wedding. There was no question about all those things. But I remember I was pregnant with my daughter, and I must have been in a yoga class. And I heard the teacher say, find your Christ consciousness now. And I had heard that so many times, and I just kind of let that wash over me. But this was the first time where I thought to myself, I don't have a Christ consciousness. In what I know today that a Christ consciousness is a higher consciousness. It doesn't mean Jesus Christ. However, at that time, I thought, I'm going to go back to my original religion, which is Judaism, and let me find out what I don't believe, and let me find out what are the things that have turned me off of my own, of finding my own identity and embracing my own identity.
It's so interesting that you're saying this, because that training that I did this afternoon, it was of a Lower East Side tour, and the guide is not Jewish. So I was explaining a lot of different things to him. And I said something about how I didn't really know a lot about other religions until I was older. And I think it's important because you can't really decide what you believe or don't believe if you're not exposed to other religions. And I think a lot of people, they grow up like, well, this is just what it is. And they're so unfamiliar with other belief systems. And I can't really say what I believe and affirm that unless I know what other people believe. And I love that you bring that up, because I think a lot of people just go through life like, well, this is what it is. And they don't really, experiment a little bit.
Well, I can't express how important I think it is to listen to how other religions practice. And as a result, I've done a lot of traveling, and I am involved in a lot of healing work. And as a result, it's taken me to places that I never thought I would go, like to Egypt and to Bali and to Peru, where I met very spiritual people, and the way they express their spirituality is not that different from Judaism. Mm-hmm. And that's what I kept finding, is that we were all talking about the same thing. And growing up, I'm a child of the 60s, and growing up as a conservative Jew, there was a sense of, well, you don't date non-Jews, and you don't mix, and there isn't the embracing adversity, even though I went to high school, and I lived out in the suburbs where there were very few Jews. And so now there's a lot of Jews, but at that time there weren't. And so most of my friends to this day, my closest friends, aren't Jewish. They're Methodist, and they are Lutheran, and they're from all different backgrounds. So I got to have wonderful conversations and find out how similar we are and how different we are. And
I hear you. Two of my best friends are children of Protestant ministers. And we had like a whole discussion at Passover about all sorts of things. So I love that that's something that you have as well.
And when I founded my congregation, I embraced, and I really reached out to that part of our out of our world that is so there's so much intermarriage, and the children are products of a great deal of intermarriage, because they were looking for their identity, which is really a product of both of their parents. And my job was to show them where we come together, that we all share the same 10 Commandments, the same original books. Our fathers were Abraham, all of Arab world, Jewish world. Mm-hmm. We shared the same father. I mean, there are just so many similarities. And growing up at that time, it was don't even go to anyone else's synagogue, let alone, go into a church or going to a Buddhist temple or any of those things. There was like this great fear. And I think some of it was because it was post World War II and what all of that, brought to the table.
Well, the mid 20th century was like the height of conservative Judaism. And I feel like when I have discussions with my husband about what I think Judaism is, he's like, is that Judaism or conservative Judaism or just the synagogue you grew up in? Because things that I think are normal, I'm like, well, maybe this was just that specific synagogue. And I was having a conversation with one of our rabbis on Friday about the Reform Judaism just sold a building. So we were talking about Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism. And she's like, I grew up conservative, and there's a reason I decided to become a Reform rabbi, because there were a lot of issues that I saw and just the way things that were changing in the world.
Well, I love that she explained that to you. And also, I think that Reform Judaism was given a bad rap because a lot of the Hebrew was taken out. And it's been adopted back in, and same with traditions and wearing talit. If you were and kippah, I mean, if you wore a kippah, which is a head covering for those of you who don't know, in a conservative synagogue, they would throw you out as a woman. They would go, "Well, who does she think she is? You wore a doily on your head."
Yeah,
and there were just these different things, and
I still see women go up on the bima not covering, and I'm like, oh, I can't. Like my mother, I like see the whole thing. Like I think back to like the fights we had about bat mitzvah attire. With the I see some of these girls go up, and I'm like, oh, it's like the early '90s. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's been so much change. We're sitting at such an interesting time in our world right now, and you and I, especially as just our generations, because we've lived seeing how liturgy has changed and how feminism has affected Judaism in a good way, and how there's so many more women rabbis than there ever were, and how it's acceptable. And I worked with Laura Geller, who was probably the second Reform rabbi, and she had so many stories to tell me about how difficult it was for her. I mean, we had those pioneering women changed the world for us. Debbie Friedman, all of them, they really changed the world for us. And we were just coming right up on their, on their, following them. And now it's like nothing, in my congregation, it's like nothing to sit with the rabbi. I mean, I never even talked to my rabbi.
I say the same thing. I hug my clergy members. Like we lost a baby last year, and the first thing my husband said was, "Do you need me to call Ben?" And then we sent him an email, and he's like, "I'm on vacation. I have no Wi-Fi, but I'll meet." Like the concept of that and like how accessible our clergy is so amazing. And I love that you're talking about specifically women. There's a professor who ended up leaving the rabbinate to become like a PhD, and she teaches like Holocaust and Jewish studies now. She was a rabbi, and this would have been, probably the early 80s. And she's like, my first time on the bima, I wore open-toed shoes, and half the congregation decided I was persona non grata because I wore open-toed shoes. It's crazy how much things have changed. And like my synagogue at the end of March, because it was a little earlier than Passover, had an all-women Seder, where there was like a woman, there was like a female-led group, and they focused on the matriarchs of Passover, and like I cried at one point. It was so lovely, but that's not something that would have existed when I grew up, especially within the conservative movement. It was all men. My mom was convinced, because I later became a singer, that I wanted to be a cantor, but maybe if I had seen a woman as a religious leader, my life might have gone a different way. And I love that my daughter grows up seeing that and thinks it's normal.
Right, right. What synagogue are you at?
We're at Rodef Shalom.
I just think, I know some of the clergy that are obviously in California because I lived there for so long. And I think that the fact that we have torn down that fourth wall and made ourselves accessible is what's keeping Judaism alive and together. I also felt that, I don't know if you know this, but growing up in the conservative movement, women were not allowed to have bat mitzvah on Saturday. Yeah. And so we had it on Friday nights, where you don't take the Torah out usually. Or
my mom, I was the first woman on my family to have a bat mitzvah. And I didn't think I realized that until I met my husband. And I was like, oh, because my mom, we'll get into this when we talk about trauma. My mom did not go to Hebrew school because of things that happened with her family. So she never had even that, but she had cousins who did the candle blessing on Friday. So I guess I never realized that, because by the early 90s, they were allowing that to happen. So when I had my bat mitzvah in 1999, like I actually read from the Torah and everything. And I guess I didn't realize at the time what a big deal that was.
Right. Historical. Yes. Of course. And you'll get to tell your daughter that someday.
Yes,
and your son, and
hopefully it'll be
your nieces and nephews, because that is a big deal. And and what I do, one of the rituals I do is I have the kids bring their whole family right before their bar bat mitzvah, grandparents and extended family. And I say, I want to go around the table and I want you kids, because we are at such an interesting time in history, and because our grandparents and great grandparents live longer, you're going to see in our lifetime, in my lifetime, how Judaism has changed in the last 80 years, I guess. I mean, or 90 years. We are on the cusp of complete change. Judaism never looked like this anywhere. And so your grandmother or your great grandmother never had a bat mitzvah because it wasn't something girls did. And so when, you get to have a bat mitzvah, it's a big deal because you're setting a new standard for your children and upcoming generations. And this is making history. And we need to emphasize that because it's a big deal. And it's a beautiful big deal because it's not women or men. It's this place in between. We need each other. We really do. There's a beautiful complementing of the feminine and the masculine. And I think Judaism is really, at least in the Reform movement, I can say, and in the circles that I've been in, we've really been able to embrace it and have respect for that. I don't think the same thing for the Orthodox circles. I do respect them greatly, but I don't respect how they treat a woman rabbi. And I also don't respect how sometimes when you say you're a Reform rabbi, it doesn't mean anything. To them, it's as if you were trained, I don't know, like online. I went through 10 years of seminary because I became a cantor first, and then I became a rabbi because it was something that I felt would make me more authentic and real. And I wanted to be a role model for our kids, for people like you, Nicole, who maybe would have been a cantor because you didn't see those.
Yeah.
You didn't see women cantors. And for me, women cantors came into my life much later. And I really went back to school at age 40, And so it's whenever you could be like Rabbi Akiva, whenever it's time, you still can do it, and you can do it as a second career because we're going to live longer.
I'm going through a career transition right now. I have like I started a master's program in January, and I'm turning 40 next year. And I'm like, well, I guess this is just what we're doing. And I'm very passionate about what I'm going to be working in, but it's nothing I saw myself doing. And I try to tell people, like, you don't know where your life is going to take you. And I feel like I look back, I still keep my toe in theater, and I look back on that, and part of my heart will always be there, but I'm really passionate about what I'm doing and the people I'm working with. Yeah. So I want to jump back to when you were 16 and talk about what happened to your father. If you're comfortable talking about it, I want to know a little more about it. And you said it changed your viewpoint on life in Judaism. And does this continue to affect the way you look at things today?
Yeah, I think that is, I think when we have trauma in our lives, it shifts us into seeing the world in a different way. You don't cruise through life anymore. You start to ask those big questions very early on. So my father and mother, they literally were going to see a Broadway show, or a show downtown, and they were held up by 3 juvenile delinquents, and one had a shotgun. It went off. That was it. Now my mother was in her 40s, so that was bizarre to me when I was her age, when I turned her age, and I thought, oh my gosh, your whole life changed. You were just starting to go back to school, kind of women's liberty days, and 5 children. I'm the youngest of 5, and she really never imagined herself as a woman taking care of herself or being self-reliant, any of that. And she ended up finishing school, and she ended up becoming a grief counselor. So she taught me something really important without saying it, which is a Jewish concept of you turn your greatest traumas, I guess, or your greatest lessons into your strengths. Where you've been hit the hardest, when that becomes your strength, you have something to teach. And it's not about a PhD. It's about being able to really overcome something terrible in your life and turn it into your strength. And I saw her do that. And I was right in line with what she did. Now, you asked me what that was like, and I felt different than everybody else. I have to say that I didn't think people would really understood how I felt, and that's something that happens when anybody goes through trauma. You feel so alone. Even though I had brothers and sisters, no one wanted to talk about it, and it was really like move on. Well, we have learned through time you can't just move on. And of course, I went through a lot of therapy and all kinds of healing modalities to free myself of that trauma. And I do want to say that later on in my life, after being married for 30 years, I got a divorce, and it traumatized me, and all that trauma came back. It was, I felt like my whole world had shattered. It did. Everything that I built up in the Jewish community, everything that I knew, my children, although they were grown up, it just shatters your entire social life. All the Jewish organizations I was in, I felt so much shame, and I felt like I didn't belong anymore. And I really wondered, well, are people going to even want a rabbi or a cantor rabbi who's been divorced? Are people going to respect me anymore? All of that came, racing forward. And I think that the greatest thing was that I remember one of my teachers said to me, just keep coming to finish up your rabbinic degree. It's going to make you an even better rabbi. And he was right, because it healed me. There is so much in Judaism that is so healing. We certainly have foremothers, and we certainly have biblical patriarchs that went through traumas and taught us, and really have left messages for us to pick up on as to how we handle these dark times. And we are people of resilience. And when people have come to me and said, well, what do you think of trauma? I said, I'm from a tribe of trauma through and through. So yeah, they just keep going. And that's what you have to do, even, despite how you feel.
Did your mother also kind of start to distance herself from Judaism? Because I know my mom had a sister that died when she was a child, and my mom was 5 years old. And her parents, who were pseudo-Orthodox at that time, kind of just washed their hands all of that. They said, if God's going to take my child, I don't believe this anymore. And I know that's kind of people kind of go one of two ways usually. And like, it's that, or they just dive deep into religion. Is that something the rest of your family did as well? That they kind of were just like, I don't understand why God would take this person who was a great person?
It's so funny that you ask that, because the first thing, we kept kosher growing up in a conservative home. The first thing my mother did after my father died, was like throw out all the kashrut. It was, let's bring in the shrimp. Not even that anyone wanted to eat that, but bring in the cheeseburgers or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There was a deep rejection from all of my family members. In fact, me coming back into Judaism was really shocking. And if you would have told me that I was going to do this for a living, I never would have believed you. Because I too had a theater background. I too have a dancer background. I did all of that. Never in my life, if you had told me this, I would have said, you're absolutely crazy. So I think that what you're saying is really interesting. And this is what we also learned. And I remember one of my rabbi teachers saying this to me too, when we talked about the feeling, even when somebody gets a disease, right? The feeling is, God, what did I do? Why are you punishing me? And there's two things that happened. One of my colleagues said, God doesn't do that. God doesn't come into our lives in that way. God is not out to punish you, even though, by the way, I grew up with a punishing God, but God doesn't give you an ailment, and God does not strike you down or punish you for whatever you're going through or your family, God is the good that you can find in it. God is the strength that you find. God is you being able to cope. And that really struck me because I began to believe in a God that wanted me to get up the next day and use this as something that was going to strengthen me and that was helping me cope. And I, to this day, truly believe that. The other thing is, and I don't know if it was Harold Kushner in his book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. But he also, I think he said something that, well, first of all, trauma happens to all people. And the truth is, and most of the time I'll get the question, well, if there's a God, then how did the Holocaust happen? That's always the first question you get.
Yes, that's where everyone goes.
Right? And I think that's what Harold Kushner did respond to. And if I'm wrong that it was him, forgive me. But the discussion about that was God was in the resilience. God was in the desire to live. God was in the stubbornness from many of those survivors who said, if I died and if I allowed myself to die, it meant that Hitler achieved his goal. And I was not going, and it meant that evil reigned on earth. And as long as I was alive, I knew there was good on earth. And that's a very high level of thinking. I mean, that was incredible that there was this altruistic idea. I mean, even in Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, right? That's the book he came out with. He was saying that he lived for other people. He lived in order to tell his story. And that affected me greatly. And I think that affects many Jewish people. And I think it gives them a lot of hope that they make a difference, that their experience and what they do means something. And we're all looking for meaning in our lives like that.
I want to jump into something you mentioned earlier about finding your way back into Judaism and then deciding to become a member of the clergy. So as you mentioned, you were both a rabbi and a cantor.
Yes.
I want to know what the decision behind all that was, kind of what the deciding, because I think when you make a career change, there's like an aha moment that you have, because I know what my aha moment was, and I feel like I tell it all the time. But what was the aha moment for you? What made you decide that you wanted to do both? And what was that process like? Because it's a very strenuous process. I know that.
Yeah. I think that I had met friends of mine who were clergy. And I started to go back to synagogue and found people who were close to my age, or women and men who I just thought were really great people. I loved hanging out with them. I loved things that they had to say. And I saw them as modern Jews, that my thought of a rabbi or cantor with a beard and one of those hats, and that wasn't what was happening anymore. And that they could have a life. And these friends of mine did go out to the movies, and they were normal people.
Yes, they exist out of the synagogue.
Right. And when I would go to workshops, I saw who they were, and they were wonderful people. And I think that I began to think, well, and my aha moment is, what do you want to leave on this planet? What really is my sole purpose? And I was at the time doing a lot of dream work, almost for 30 years with a teacher, Connie Kaplan, with my co-author, Tamar Frankel. And this dreaming was not the dreaming that you find in Jungian therapy. This was more Native American based, where there are circles of women who come together and they give parts of their dream to this circle, and they begin to see how it's like a puzzle, that how they are dreaming in reality. And in doing that kind of work, I took very seriously traditions. I took very seriously when I would see ceremony and I saw how incredible that was and how powerful even just a dream circle was. And so
What
I
is a
began,
dream circle? I feel like I don't know very much. I know a lot
okay,
about like Judeo-Christian religions, but a part of me's my husband's and
good.
my psychiatrist always tell me to meditate, and I feel like my
How do
brain does
you do
not
that?
work. My brain
Okay,
does not work with that. And I'm
that's
all
not
he,
true.
but I feel like I don't know as much about Eastern or Native American ritual and ceremonies.
I'm happy to tell you about it. And my books that I've written are connecting a lot of that to Judaism. I mean, I wrote those books 20 with Tamar Frankel almost 25 years ago. So they were very cutting edge at the time. But when you ask me, what is a dream circle? And in the second book that Tamar and I wrote, it was called Entering the Temple of Dreams. And at that time, I never realized that our patriarchs always saw God in the dream. And if you think about it, okay, right? But we don't think of it that way because we just say, oh, and Joseph was a dreamer. But it doesn't occur to us that the same dreams that we have at night may have power. So when Tamar and I explored this and wanted to talk about Jewish dreaming, we studied Talmud and we looked at all these sources. And because the men were really connected to were writing Talmud, their interpretation was very stilted. They didn't. Some of it was stilted, I should say. They were worried about nocturnal emissions and those kinds of things. However, the most
It's a big
brilliant
problem.
rabbis who were spiritual and were connected Kabbalistically talked about the fact that dreaming is a 60th. Now, a 60th is a measurement in kashrut that's just enough to count, but it doesn't really count. So if something is a 60th of non-kosher, it still counts. But if you don't kosher it, you can kind of get by with it. You should kosher it, but you could get by with it. 1/60th is just enough to count. So there's all of these measurements that are in the Talmud about 1/60th. And 1/60th of dreaming is prophecy. And 1/60th of dreaming, it's
You're
fascinating.
gonna make me cry because I'm about to tell you a story. My family makes fun of me because I have very vivid dreams. Very vivid that I remember. Like I will remember a dream I had years ago. And then I dream about friends that have passed away a lot. And the night I got engaged, I had a dream that my grandmother who was gone, we were in like some hospital situation and she was trying to touch me and these people were holding her back and she couldn't talk. So I always felt like she was trying to come through, and I have never had a dream about her before or since. And I have a lot of, I know, like that's why I've been crying because I dreams are very much a part of my life. And like my sister's like, I never remember my dreams. And I'm like, you're crazy. Cause I have such vivid dreams that I remember years later. So I am obsessed with this concept now.
Okay.
I love this.
You'll love Connie Kaplan's books on dreaming. Okay, that's number 2. You'll love my book, Entering the Temple of Dreams, because it'll
I'll have to check that
confirm
out. Yeah.
like things that you feel. But so dreaming, there's the bedtime shema that we say at night, and the last prayer says that you step into it's called the hamapil, and you step into the pupil of your eye is what it says. And the belief is that at night your soul unties itself and travels in like a grid of the dream realm, and which is very ethereal, that can have maybe people from your past, people who are not embodied. And think about it. When the morning comes, the very first prayer you say is Moda ani lefanecha. Thank you, God, for returning my soul to this physical body. And so there's confirmation, which is in my books, and our books are really well notated. You can find anything where we got the material, and it's very, very Talmud based. And what's so interesting is I never, but many people never saw it that way or don't see it that way. Mainstream Judaism doesn't teach it that way. And you find it more in Kabbalah and mysticism.
Native Americans have something similar, yes?
And what the Native Americans believe is that also their soul travels at night, and it heals, and it does work, and that sometimes there are different kinds of dreaming, and it's all connected to the moon. Now, Judaism, as Jews, we're people of the moon. That's what we are governed by, because our calendar is a moon calendar versus the Roman calendar, a sun calendar. So every month, basically, you're going to have different kinds of dreaming, and there's 12 types of dreaming. Some dreams are more prophetic, some have your ancestors in them, but everybody's dreaming has a different language. That's why it's not Jungian. That's why you can't look it up. And that's why you talk about it in a circle, because you can't really interpret your own dreams. So Native American women would come together and they would share their dream. And they would start, and they would also pass a stone around and create this vortex of energy where they were really bringing in other consciousness, of what they were meant to know, number one. And when I say prophecy, too, it doesn't mean that if you dream you're dying or that someone dies, that they're going to die. That's very rare.
My great-grandmother was like that, though. She would have a dream. My mom she was like a witch. She'd have a dream the last Friday of every month, and it would always come true. And she knew that my mom's sister was going to die.
Well,
she knew.
Some people are gifted with certain things. Maybe that wasn't such a gift. And I do believe that I know many Jewish psychics. They're just sensitive and they're very, very attuned. And I am not psychic, but I do want to say, and I'll tell you my experience with dreaming, and I'm not unlike your sister. I could not remember a dream at all. And you have to write down your dream in the morning so that, number one, you don't lose it during the day, and so you can share it in Dream Circle. I could never remember my dreams, and I never thought I was a dreaming woman. And when I went to my teacher, Connie, I said, I want you to help me stop dreaming because my dreams are scaring me. They're either about someone chasing me or, those typical dreams that you would have that would just make you go, ugh, or I would wake up in the dream and
I have those too. It's like night terrors in children before adults. I will literally, this doesn't happen as much anymore. I would wake up screaming.
Right. And what she taught me, she laughed and she said, you're a dreaming woman. And I said, no. But she said, okay, tell me what your dream was. So I had this dream that I was in the bathroom and all these spiders were coming out of the toilet. And I was like, why would I have a dream like that? And she said, Judy, what are spiders? They're the feminine. And they can create a web out of nowhere. You've seen the webs that they create. They're weavers of the web. And that's what a dreaming woman is. She weaves reality. And she said that is kind of like your spider medicine is your strength as a woman and as somebody who's able to weave these different parts of these different educations together. And the other thing is, if you have a bathroom dream, the bathroom is the one place, think about it, where we are all connected. We're all connected through plumbing. And that's the weave underground. So and that I'd never heard anything like that. And I was like, oh, okay. So over the years, I tried everything to remember and write down my dreams. And I do have a lot of journals. There's much more to it than that. However, in that work, we also began to do soul contract readings. And your soul contract is based on your astrological chart because it's like a cookie cutter in time and space. Boom. There's energy in that. Mm-hmm. And right now, actually, I'm teaching a class on Judaism, monthly Judaism, that Judaism every month has energy. Every holiday has energy. But every month of the Jewish calendar year is filled with energy that is documented. You have an astrology sign that's connected to it. There's gematria connected to it. There are Hebrew letters connected to it. There are holidays connected to it. There are Torah portions connected to it. There's a winter, spring, summer, fall energy to all of this. And it's ancient, but it's very relevant. And it's so much a part of how I live my life. I created something like this years ago. And this is how I teach Judaism is oops, I'll turn it around the other way, is the cyclical nature of the Jewish calendar, which was grounded in 2 weeks. We're going to have the Torah portion and more. Our holidays were set. Time was set for the Jewish people, and around agriculture and around nature and the natural steady rhythm of nature that we're asked to go back to, so we're not so anxious. And I'm talking about 4 different things at once.
Yeah, we've got off a little bit of the script.
Talk to you about even meditation. There are meditations in a service, let's just say a Jewish service, and there's talking. Or if there's silence at the Kedusha, people don't know what to do with themselves. And there are so many ways of learning how to meditate. There's so many kinds of meditation. I always liked someone guiding me through meditation. But there is breath work. You're a singer. You're connected to vibration. I worked with sound bowls during the time of COVID because I wanted to bring my vibration up, so to speak. And if you sing, your vibration is higher. That's why we sing the Torah, right? When we sing in trope, Shabbat, Shir Ladonai, all of it, the Song of the Sea. It was on a pshat level, simple level. Yes, it was song, but on a higher level, it was sound waves that changed the world. And so these are the beautiful levels of studying Judaism that my mind was already open to from meditation, Kundalini yoga, and all the breath work connected to that. I did somatic dancing. I still do. Things where I am connecting my body and what my body's going through to prayer, to singing, to all of this, because it has an effect on my physicality. Your body's made out of water. It's affected.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And you know that as a mom and as a singer, you can only sing as because it floats along your breath.
But going back to your aha moment, when was that? So you're doing a dream circle.
Yes. And I began to ask the bigger questions, like what my soul purpose is. What is my life purpose? What does my soul yearn for? And then there's the Jewish piece that went, what do I want to leave here after me? And this was after I had my children. And I realized that I wanted to bring all the things that I love together. And that happened with my books. Working with Tamar Frankel helped me to understand that I had a mind that, and I could teach about something because I was a physical trainer and I was a dancer. And so I knew things about the physical body that made sense to me through my training in those fields. And I help people heal their bodies. So after those, it really, the aha moment was a combination of the dreamwork, of writing 2 books with Tamar Frankel, and going into the Jewish world and seeing that people were really tough on me because they asked me, well, what are your credentials? And how do you come to know all this stuff? And I was young at the time, and that shocked me. And I explained what my credentials were, but in the Jewish world, that didn't mean anything. So what I decided is that I wanted a voice out in the world because I had something to teach that no one else was teaching. And there was no cantorial school in California. And I, again, was friends with cantors, and I went to some of the Cantors Assembly conferences, and there were enough people in there who wanted to be ordained, who couldn't leave their families, move to New York, go to Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. We came together and we formed the Academy of Jewish Religion, which it took a couple of years, but it came together and became a viable school, an accredited school. And I finally had the money to do it. I didn't before. In my 40s, my ex-husband all of a sudden was making enough money, and he said, go to school, go become a cantor. You love this, you believe in it. and you're creating your Judaism as a spirituality that is really fulfilling to you. So go be a cantor, because I sang first. So I went back to school and I thought that was it, and I was working at Temple Emmanuel in Beverly Hills, and there wasn't enough room for two cantors that were myself and another cantor that was there. And so when I left that job, I was really sad. And again, here's my epiphany: start your own. So I started my own minyan, and people came. And I made a promise to God. I said, as long as you bring 10, I'm there. That spiraled into having a high holidays. And then I realized if I didn't have temple membership, no one was there after high holidays. And, I'd have to build that back up again. And then 10 women came to me and said, I want to study Torah with you. So I studied in my home, and tens kept showing up for me. And 200 later, over 15 years, the Nachshon Minyan thrived on people who did not fit into the mold of the conservative Judaism you and I talk about, even the Reform Judaism. I wanted to create a space where people could belong, they could be divorced, they could be intermarried, and then their children started coming. And I never wanted to teach children. And again, the moment came where God said, this is 10 more. And every time 10 showed up, I was there. And it was the most beautiful experience of my life. Hundreds of children, bar and bat mitzvah, high holidays with all of them singing all the way through. Just incredible stories of people feeling rejected by Judaism, coming back because their children made them come back. So many bar and bat mitzvah kids. It just was really, I worked with a great executive director. It was creative. We were on the cutting edge. And after COVID, even though we survived and all of that, I then got the message I was done. However, I want to go back really quick. About 7 years into having Nachshon, I brought different rabbis and cantors and different rabbis, and nobody liked them. I never had the confidence that I could become a rabbi, and didn't have many women models, and I realized that people would say, well, where's the rabbi? And I decided to go back because I wanted my people to feel that they got the real thing. And so I went back to my school and I said, is there a possibility that I can go back? I know I've taken a lot of the courses already that rabbis take, because cantors and rabbis take a lot of the same courses. And they said, absolutely. In fact, we're having our first year where we are ordaining people to be rabbis and cantors. It's because they could see it. We could see it in the future, that the future of synagogues is they couldn't afford both. And
it's expensive.
Right. And so they were hiring one or the other, usually a rabbi who could sing, sort of. And so that's what happened is I joined. I told them I'm going to have to do this slowly because I have a family and I have a congregation. They were fine with it. And then in 2015, I handed in my dissertation and graduated. So I was in seminary for about 10 years, and I loved it.
I love going to school. I feel like I'm already like, I'm going to get my, I planned to get my PhD, and I'm like, and then I'll get a second master's in psychology. And I'm really interested in intergenerational trauma. So I was like, I'll specifically be a therapist catering to 3Gs. And I'm like, I'm creating these. Yeah, I'm going to be in school till I'm 90 years old. So I totally understand. It's so funny you talk about not affording clergy, because this is part of the conversation I was having about Union for Reform Judaism selling the building. They have low student count. And we were talking about how back in the day, rabbis they used to give them houses. And that's not something that happens anymore. Could you imagine getting a job as a rabbi and then be like, here's your house? And that was something that was common amongst all religions. Like my friend my friend Matt, his father was a minister, and they lived in a house that was given to them by the church. That doesn't
That was
exist
right
anymore.
next door, probably.
Yeah, exactly. It was, it was the parish house. They
Right.
don't do that anymore. I feel like, I don't know if it's declining membership or people are just not paying as much or whatever it is you have to run a synagogue like a business at some point, and it gets expensive for some people, and it's very difficult, like you were
Nicole, you have a
saying.
very different body of people who are donating and who are validating synagogues and clergy, because clergy are expendable. And the clergy that you may have had growing up, they were treated in a very different way too. And I remember the day that that clergy was coming to our workshops and things, just saying, I was just discarded like an old man, old cloth or whatever. There was a lot of covet and respect and care that was taken towards the clergy that does not even exist at all anymore.
Yeah, a lot of, especially I noticed Reform rabbis, there's a lot of jumping around, maybe because they're trying to they're trying to get better or in higher positions, but there's a lot of jumping around I've noticed, which I think would be really stressful.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted a home. The congregation that I'm with now, I didn't think I was going to go with another congregation, and there's my aha moment. Is the man who I am my partner? He's a cantor. He was in Los Angeles, and he was offered a temporary job in Fort Worth, Texas. They loved him. They hired him on the spot, basically. And I came out here to teach at his synagogue, the class I'm talking to you about, the monthly energy. And on top of that, I was teaching my books there, all the different prayers, the traditional Jewish prayers connected to spirituality and Kabbalah and movement, because I created movement to these prayers. And this is so weird. I was in the Jewish community. We were doing a Yom HaShoah, and this man saw me and he said, we've been looking for a rabbi for, the last 5 years. Would you maybe be interested? We don't like anyone that we've had. And I was literally hired last June. It was just like, boom. And I moved here in July and started in August. So, and I'm here in Fort Worth, Texas, in Colleyville, and talk about trauma. Nicole, this is interesting for you. I don't know if you know what happened in Colleyville, but they had a hostage incident in 2022. And there were 5 congregants who were held, and the rabbi were held up by a terrorist. And it was a horrible, horrible situation. And they suffered because of, how the whole thing panned out, is that it was during COVID. It was a time where their rabbi was transitioning out, and this happened, and it drove people away. And they're just having a renaissance now.
This is at your synagogue that this happened? I remember this, and the rabbi kind of talked him down. And I remember, because anything bad happens in the Jewish community, I feel like it's just inundated. I know. My husband's always like, what are you watching on social media that I'm getting these videos? And I'm like, well, the same things I'm always watching.
But of all places to be asked to work, somebody who had experienced trauma, gun violence, those kinds of things that you're talking about.
What was that transition like moving to Texas? I feel like, as someone who spent so much time in California, that must have been a huge culture shock.
I'm still in it. I did a program for the Daughters of Abraham. It's an incredible group of women, like 50 women from every type of Christianity, Muslim group, Jewish, that have come together, that are daughters of Abraham, and they want to find their commonalities. And there is such a diverse group of Christianity. I didn't even know they all existed. And there's a real desire to, have interfaith dialogues, interfaith experiences. Just on Sunday, we showed the movie October 8th, which just came out, to the Methodist church across the street first of all, I was thrilled they were interested. There were about 50 people, 80 people that showed up, half their congregation, half ours, and they just didn't know. And that they trusted our community to bring something that was about democracy in America and bigger than Judaism. Also, they didn't know. So there's good work going on here is what I'm trying to say.
Good, because I feel like I hear things about Texas and I'm like, oh, Texas. The interfaith dialogue is so important because a lot of the kids I work with at the museum have never met a Jewish person before. And being in the New York metropolitan area, you can ask, how is that possible? Like, they lived in really insular communities and I'm the first Jewish person they've ever met. There's a lot of research. I was fighting with somebody today on Instagram about this because they were like, where's this study? And I said, well, it's new. It's literally brand new. It's not even been published yet, about how Holocaust education does not prevent anti-Semitism. You need to humanize Jewish people. You need to introduce Jewish culture and values and say, this is literally what you do and a lot of what you believe in. And I love that you're making that happen in a place like Texas where there's so much divisive stuff happening there.
Well, also, it's so interesting again. And I had this epiphany just over Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. Really, I love Theodor Herzl. I was just blown away. That Theodor Herzl Museum in Israel just woke me up. And I just thought to myself, the least likely Jew who did this work, he was a journalist. He was not interested. He was not a religious Jew. He's the last one. That's how we are in this day and age. People who really, they get grabbed by the neck. I'm one of those people, and I wanted my congregation to love Theodor Herzl as much as I did. And I've researched so many things about him. But here's the thing that struck me. First of all, the word Zionism, I know for many Christians is very scary because they've been convinced that
it's become a dirty word.
It's become an ism. And I will say, don't even use the word Zionism. Just mean the belief that the Jewish people should have a homeland. Because that word I can see as a trigger. But I realized that I grew up, and maybe you did too, believing that Israel was the antidote to the Holocaust. I really believe that if Israel exists, the Holocaust
would never happen. Yeah.
Okay, right? I believed that with all my heart and soul. And when I taught about Israel, I would teach that. And now, and this was the first time I said this, I said, that was Herzl's dream. And he died at 44. 40 years, later, Israel becomes a state. We all think that. And now it isn't the truth because anti-Semitism is worse than ever and it's become anti-Zionism. And that was the first time I was a little scared. I thought, wow, when the Jewish people are strong, the world wants to kill them.
That's what Dara Horn says, is that people love dead Jews, is that the Jews who are dead, they're not. And Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I was at a Yom HaShoah event with 3GNY, and it was really interesting. It was a Seder for Yom HaShoah. It was like an order of events, and there was it was really interesting. They had an excerpt of a speech that he gave about how in the medieval times they hated us because of our religion. And then in the late 19th century it became a race. And now it is a hatred of the fact that we have Israel. That's become the new anti-Semitism.
And did you see his little, the cartoon thing that he has of anti-Semitism is anti-Judaism? Or anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism?
No, I haven't seen that.
Look on his website. It's amazing. But anyway, go ahead.
It's crazy. And a lot of people I think, well, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just anti-Israel. And it's the only country I think, but it's the only country you think shouldn't exist. And they've kind of become wrapped up in this literal terrorist rhetoric. And I'm several blocks from Colombia. So I feel like I'm in the middle of this and these kids are walking around and I just want to shake them and say, please, wait till your frontal lobe is developed to make these choices that you're making. And it's a very scary time. It's very scary. And I think the only good thing that has come from that is people are embracing their Judaism in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before. People are learning. I think people are converting. I think, my guest that I talked to last week, she was in the middle of her conversion when October 7th happened. And she said she thought the rabbi who was helping her with her conversion thought she was going to leave. But
one of the men who wanted to convert in my congregation, who went through the hostage experience, the rabbi said to him, I bet you're not going to want to convert anymore. He said, even more so. And I've converted many, and there's at least 5 right now that have come to me over the last year in Colleyville, in Texas, that want to convert. And I said, and the first thing I say to them is, are you sure? Do you know what's going on with anti-Semitism? And they said, even more so. It's in my soul. It's time now.
I think that's the only good thing that's come out of this is we've shown we can rally together. And what's beautiful is Jews of every background are experiencing the same thing and they are saying the same things. And I feel it's much more of a, like we were talking about, there's separation of everything. I think it's much more of a tribe and community feel than it ever has been before, because we've done this before a couple times and we know how it can end, and we're going to make sure that never happens again. And I love that the converts are coming up. If you're interested in converting and you're listening, please call Rabbi-Cantor Judy. So I want to touch on a couple things. I want to talk a little bit about what your advice would be to Jews who are interested in exploring other Jewish aspects of their spirituality, because that's obviously something that you've done. But, let's say you come from a Jewish background, you grew up Jewish, but you're interested in exploring things like Buddhism or things like meditation or Native American spirituality. Is there a place where that can live together? What is your advice to them?
Yeah. And I remember feeling, is this sacrilegious, and is studying soul contracts, and is this conflicted, information? The truth is, the reason why a lot of Jews love Buddhism is because there's no deity. There's no deity that you are giving yourself to. So Buddhism is fine. It has beautiful philosophy, I think. Especially about life and death. And Judaism shares a lot of it. So, it will teach you meditation. And it's a different kind of meditation that you'll find maybe in your Jewish services, because the Jewish services don't have a lot of silence, at least the ones that I've gone to.
We're afraid of silence, obviously.
I try to bring meditation in. People get a little frightened when it gets quiet. They don't know what to do. So yoga, Kundalini, all of those things, wonderful, wonderful practices, not only for your physical body, but your mind and your soul. When you're dealing with a soul, you're not dealing with that's where we come together. That's why people love the word spirituality, because it talks about soul. We all have souls, and they don't have a religion. As far as other kinds, because I love healing, and I have gone through all types of healing, and many of us want to heal our souls and our hearts that get broken, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. So I say, have your Jewish identity and search. Be a searcher and a seeker, and don't just take my word for it or Nicole's word for it. There's so much online today. Find out for yourself. Look up on Safaria things that I've said that you might question. That one of the reasons, by the way, Nicole, the reason I went to cantorial school and to rabbinic school is because I wanted to know if what I was taught was true. Is it true that you can't be buried in a Jewish graveyard if you have a tattoo? And what about the women who have tattooed eyebrows and tattoos on their, lips and their eyes? What about them? And I found, and I wanted to know if just because my rabbi said this, if this is what Judaism thought, and what do the Orthodox, conservative, Reform, and are you allowed to pick and choose? And are you called to pick and choose Jew? Guess what? Everyone's a pick and choose Jew. I don't care who you are, and we need to respect each other.
Thank you for saying that, because I feel like this is my problem with a lot of people who identify as modern Orthodox. We lived in a building with a lot of them, and they would get in the elevator and ask us to push a button, which I said, I'm not allowed to push the button. I'm Jewish. And then they were like, oh, but it was fine if someone else pushed the button, and that's very pick and choose. And I feel like, yeah,
it's also making people feel bad. We're not supposed to create discomfort for somebody else because of what our beliefs are. There's a lot of hypocrisy. And the truth, and I wanted to know, I would ask these rabbis and cantors, what's going on in your head when you're davening so fast? Are you really taking in what that prayer says? And we were in a situation where they could say, well, we don't need that. We just, the exercise of it is just, it's like doing calisthenics for many. It was. And being in rhythm with everybody else. But in today's world, people need to know what they're saying. It doesn't fly. By the way, with the next generation, I was told to go and I went. Kids are not going to go because you tell them to go. They just aren't. They're too rebellious. And you should hear some of the things these bar mitzvah kids say, but I embrace it because I say, if you don't want to be here, go. Go. I don't want to be here with you. But I do happen to get the children who are serious and who want to be there and I tell the parents, if you're making your kid do this, don't. It's not worth it. Let them come back later. Because if it's forced on you, there's so many stories that I heard, with adults crying because they were forced to do it. They hated it. And that's the thing that needs, you can't force anyone to do this. You have to love it. And I love what I do. I love teaching Judaism from that open standpoint where people get to discover it. They have the dignity of discovering it for themselves. And what feels good. And that is, that's a gift. So, kind of what you were talking about with, the smart questions, your husband would say, well, is it what your rabbi said? Is it what the conservative movement? You have to ask those questions.
Mm-hmm. What are your hopes and goals for your new congregation? Because you've been there less than a year. Mm-hmm. What are the things that you're hoping to accomplish?
I want to accomplish some stability because the congregation's been through so many changes and different rabbis and all of that. And I want to bring that next generation. There's a lot of young people coming because I'm there. Because they see a woman, they see something new, they see something refreshing to them. And my hope is to bring to this congregation, and they do love their Judaism, music. They didn't ever have a cantor before. So I want to bring them all different kinds of music and teach about the music. And it's beautiful. And I want to teach. I want to give them another layer to what they already know and not have them feel intimidated. I want them to ask the questions so that they can own their Judaism and in a different way, in an even stronger way. Those are my goals. And I think really encouraging that next generation is a biggie.
It's really important.
It's really important. I think that our future rests with them loving it. And if I just felt that if the next generation is raised the way I was raised, they're not going to love it and they're not going to go.
Because it becomes like a chore. Nobody wants to, you need to bring the joy. And I feel like, especially with a lot of religious Jews, I feel like it's not a joy because it's a chore and it shouldn't be.
Exactly.
And something like religion shouldn't be. Sometimes it can feel like a chore when it's, the third day of the holidays, but, but in general, it should not feel like that.
Right.
So this last portion of the interview is going to be short form like the Actors Studio. So these don't require long answers. What is your favorite Yiddish word?
Oh boy, my mother speaks fluent Yiddish. The first thing that came to my head was kvetch, but I don't know if that's my favorite. Moishe Kapoyer is, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I think there's just some hysterical sounding words that I make my mother say because she has the accent of it. So for any of your listeners, Moishe Kapoyer. And, all there's shlemiel, shlemazel, all of those are great, great words. The Yiddish world was just brilliant.
What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I really love Passover and how it goes into the Omer and how it goes into all the Yoms and Shavuot. It's a very rich time, and it's very similar to the high holidays on the opposite end. But I love the the family connection to Passover, all the different versions of Passover. I love all the music and all the various ways that you can engage children and adults. And then afterwards, there's spiritual work for you to do. And because I love Musar, I love, it kind of, for me, begins with the counting of the Omer and then Shavuot.
If you were to have a bat mitzvah today and have a big blowout party, what would the theme be?
The theme would be all the brilliant people, teachers that I love. I mean, there'd be a Heschel table, there'd be a Herzl table, there'd be a, Rabbi Sachs table, there would be, a Golda table, there would be, Nechama Leibowitz table, Aviva Zornberg table. That's, I would just want people to know who these brilliant minds were who have shaped Judaism.
What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
None.
That's the first time I've gotten that answer.
No,
good for
this
you.
is what I wanted to be, and it took a long time to get here, but this is exactly what I wanted.
So if heaven is real and God is there to welcome you, what would you like to hear them say?
Good job. Thank you. I know it wasn't easy. Just I would like to hear, good job. It's time to rest.
Thank you so much for joining me this evening. This has been amazing, and I only cried like twice. I feel like I always cry with my good interviews. This is Nicole Kelly, and this has been She Brew in the City.